He should have been in first class. That was the entire point of owning the airline. Instead, Han Jun-seo sat in seat 34C, economy, middle row, knees pressed against the seat in front of him, wearing a plain gray hoodie that made him look like any other tired businessman flying home. No entourage, no assistant, no black car waiting at the gate with his name whispered between staff like a warning. Just him, a boarding pass under a fake name, and a decision he'd made 11 days ago that he still couldn't fully explain to himself. He'd seen her first on a routine review of internal service footage, grainy security camera angles nobody was ever meant to actually watch closely. A flight attendant, mid-shift, kneeling in the narrow aisle beside an elderly man having a panic attack somewhere over the Pacific, holding his shaking hands in both of hers, speaking to him in a voice so calm it came through even without sound, just from the shape of her mouth and the stillness in her shoulders. He'd watched that 4-second clip 9 times before he even knew her name. Abina Owusu, 28. Flight attendant, 3 years with the airline. Unremarkable file, by every metric that was supposed to matter to a man like him. No red flags, no complaints, no reason her name should have ever crossed his desk at all. Except it had. And now here he was, a man who controlled the airline she worked for, who could have grounded this exact flight with one phone call. Sitting in economy with a stiff neck and a boarding pass that said Kim Do-yeon, waiting to see her walk down this aisle in person. She appeared 11 minutes after boarding closed, moving briskly past row 30, checking overhead bins, murmuring apologies to passengers whose bags wouldn't fit. Jun-seo watched her over the top of a magazine he wasn't reading. Up close, she looked exactly like she had in the footage, steady, unhurried, present in a way that felt almost foreign to him, like watching someone speak a language his own world had quietly stopped teaching people to speak. Then it happened. Row 31. A child, maybe 6, was crying, inconsolable, his mother visibly at the end of her patience. Apologizing to everyone around her in 3 languages at once, Abina crouched down without being asked, pulled something small and shining from her apron pocket, a tiny foil-wrapped chocolate, the kind meant for first class, and pressed it into the boy's palm like it was a secret between just the 2 of them. "Don't tell my manager," she whispered, loud enough for Jun-seo, 1 row back, to hear every word. "This is technically against the rules. But some rules are stupid." The boy laughed. The mother nearly cried with relief. And Jun-seo, who had fired department heads for smaller infractions than stolen first-class chocolate, felt something shift quietly in his chest that had nothing to do with airline policy at all. He should have looked away. He didn't. 2 hours into the flight, the woman beside him, an older passenger with silver hair and sharp, curious eyes, fell asleep with her head tilting dangerously toward his shoulder. Jun-seo sat rigid, unsure of airline etiquette he had genuinely never needed to learn, and glanced up to find Abina already watching him with quiet amusement from the aisle. "You can move her pillow without waking her," she said softly, crouching down beside his row. "Like this." She reached over with practiced gentleness and adjusted the small travel pillow, guiding the sleeping woman's head to rest against it instead of against him. "There, you looked like you were about to file a formal complaint against gravity." Jun-seo almost laughed out loud, an actual, unguarded sound that surprised him more than it surprised her. "Thank you," he said. "First time flying with us?" she asked, straightening up, her tone easy, professional, kind in the specific way people are kind to strangers they never expect to see again. "Something like that," he said. She smiled. A real one. Not the practiced airline smile he'd seen 1,000 times in 1,000 training videos. And moved on to the next row, already crouching down to help someone else with something small and unglamorous, and completely beneath the attention of anyone as powerful as the man secretly watching her. Jun-seo sat back in his cramped, uncomfortable, deeply unfamiliar seat 34C and thought, with a clarity that unsettled him. "I have owned this airline for 6 years, and I have never once seen it the way she makes people feel it." 3 hours later, Somewhere over the ocean, in the middle of the night with most of the cabin asleep, and only the low hum of engines filling the dark, Jun Seo woke from a half-doze to hushed voices near the galley. Abina and another attendant, their voices low enough to be private, careless enough to carry. They're cutting 11 positions next quarter, the other voice said. Corporate memo went out today. Seniority doesn't matter this time. They're using customer complaint ratios, whatever that even means. I haven't had a single complaint in 3 years, Abina said, and for the first time all night. Jun Seo heard something different underneath her voice. Not panic, but the specific, controlled exhaustion of someone doing math she'd already done 100 times. I know. But you also called in sick twice last month for your mom's chemo, and Park doesn't forget things like that when he's building his list. I heard your name, already. Silence, long enough that Jun Seo, wide awake now in the dark, found himself holding his own breath without meaning to. I can't lose this job, Abina said finally, quietly. Like she was saying it more to herself than to her coworker. I have 4 more months of payments before her treatment's even close to finished. If I get cut, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Jun Seo sat in the dark of seat 34C, a stranger's magazine open uselessly on his lap, and understood with sudden, absolute clarity that he had just overheard something he was never supposed to hear. A name on a termination list. A sick mother's chemo bills. A woman who gave away first-class chocolate to crying children while quietly falling apart under weight nobody on this plane could see. And somewhere in the dark cabin, a decision he hadn't even known he was building toward finally locked into place. He was going to fix this. He had absolutely no idea. Yet, how much fixing it was going to cost him? Before we go further, I have a quick question. I want to know where in the world you're watching this from tonight. Drop your city or country in the comments. I read every single one, and I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you're the type who needs to know how this ends before you can sleep, hit subscribe now, because trust me, this one gets so much bigger. Now, back to the story. The overhead lights dimmed to their lowest setting as the plane pushed further into the night. And Jun Seo sat wide awake in seat 34C, replaying the overheard conversation in his mind like a recording he couldn't stop. 11 positions. Customer complaint ratios. Chemo bills. He thought of Park immediately. Park Young-ho, head of cabin services. A man Jun Seo had personally approved for that position 4 years ago, based on a recommendation and a clean spreadsheet. He had never once questioned how Park built his termination lists. Why would he? That was precisely the layer of management Jun Seo paid people to handle, so he never had to think about spreadsheets with names on them. Except now there was a name on it he couldn't stop thinking about. He pulled out his phone, screen brightness turned all the way down, and opened a secure note. He typed quickly, quietly, his thumbs moving in the dark. Abina Owusu. Cabin crew. Sick leave mother's chemo. Termination list Park. Find out everything. He stared at the note for a long moment before adding one more line. Do not let her know I asked. He wasn't sure yet why that last part mattered so much to him. He told himself it was strategic if word got back that the owner was personally investigating a single flight attendant's file. It would create exactly the kind of spectacle he'd spent his whole career avoiding. But some smaller, more honest part of him knew the real reason. He didn't want her kindness to change the moment she learned who he was. He wanted just a little longer of being nobody to her. Just a stranger in 34C who'd needed help with a sleeping woman's pillow. Around 3 a.m., unable to sleep, he got up to use the restroom near the galley and found Abina there alone, restocking a cart with small bottles of water, her movement slower now, tired in a way she hadn't let herself look in front of passengers. Can't sleep? She asked quietly, not looking up, assuming from his silhouette that he was simply another restless passenger. Something like that, Jun Seo said again his second time using that exact phrase tonight, and he wondered, briefly, if it had become a kind of shield. She glanced up then, recognizing him. Ah, pillow guy. A small, tired smile. You should try to sleep. We land in 4 hours. Long night for you too, he said, nodding toward the cart, the dark circles just visible under her eyes despite the dim lighting. She shrugged, the practiced deflection of someone used to hiding exhaustion for a living. Comes with the job. Does it always? He asked. Come with the job, I mean. The chocolate. The pillow adjustments. The crouching down to comfort strangers' children at 1 a.m. He said it carefully, testing something, though he couldn't have said exactly what. Something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe, that a stranger had noticed that much. I don't know, she said slowly. I guess I just don't like people feeling alone up here. Planes are strange places. Everyone's suspended between two lives for a few hours, and most of the time nobody even looks at each other. She resumed stacking water bottles. My mother used to say, small kindness is the only kind most people ever get to give. So I figure, why not give it? Jun Seo said nothing for a moment, the words landing somewhere he hadn't expected them to land. Your mother sounds like a wise woman, he said finally. Something shifted, fast, behind Abina's eyes, a flicker of pain quickly smoothed over by professional composure. She is, she said. She's just having a hard year. He wanted, badly, to say something more, to ask about the chemo directly, to somehow signal that he already knew, that he wanted to help. He caught himself just in time. I hope it gets easier for her, he said instead. Careful, plain, thank you. Abina said softly, and for a moment the tiredness in her face gave way to something gentler, more open gratitude toward a total stranger, who had, without knowing any of the real details, still managed to say exactly the right small thing. She finished restocking the cart, wished him a good rest of the flight, and disappeared back down the aisle. Jun Seo returned to his seat and did not sleep for the remaining hours of the flight. He sat instead with his phone dark in his lap, running calculations that had nothing to do with airline logistics. How many months of chemo? How much it likely cost in this country's system? How visible he could afford to be before this became something the tabloids could turn into a story about a rich man's charity project, instead of what it actually was. By the time the plane began its descent into Incheon, gray dawn light spilling weakly through the window shades, Jun Seo had made two decisions. The first, Park Young-ho's termination list was never going to include Abina Owusu's name. That part was simple. A phone call, a quiet instruction, done before breakfast. The second decision was harder, messier, and far more dangerous to a man who had spent his entire adult life avoiding exactly this kind of complication. He was going to find a reason, a legitimate, deniable, ordinary reason to see Abina Owusu again. As the plane taxied toward the gate and passengers began gathering their bags, Abina walked the aisle one final time, thanking people for flying with them. Her voice warmed despite the long night behind her. When she reached row 34, she paused. Safe travels, she said to Jun Seo, meeting his eyes for just a moment longer than professional courtesy required. I hope whatever brought you to economy tonight worked out the way you needed it to. Jun Seo felt something cold drop through his stomach. Did she know? Had she guessed? But her expression held nothing but genuine, unknowing kindness, the same kindness she'd apparently give any stranger on any flight, on any night, for reasons that had nothing to do with him at all. It did, he said quietly. More than you know. She smiled once more and moved on to the next row, disappearing into the small, ordinary rituals of landing, completely unaware that the man in seat 34C now knew her mother's illness, her coworker's warning, and the exact shape of the danger closing in on the job she couldn't afford to lose, and completely unaware that he had already decided, somewhere over the dark Pacific, that he was not going to let it happen. 3 days after landing, Jun Seo sat in his real office for the first time, in what felt like weeks, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Gangnam, a view he'd stopped noticing years ago. Across from him stood Yoo Hae-rin, his chief of staff, the only person in the company who could read his moods faster than his own reflection. You want me to do what? She asked, not bothering to hide her disbelief. Pull Park Young-ho's cabin services termination list, Jun Seo said, quietly, before it goes to HR for processing. That list isn't due to cross your desk for another 2 weeks. Why does it suddenly matter to you now? Jun Seo didn't answer right away, which told Heron everything she needed to know. In 11 years of working for him, she had learned that his silences were louder than most men's shouting. "There's a name on it," he said finally. "It needs to come off." Heron's eyebrows rose slightly. "One name. Specifically, Abina Osu. Cabin crew." "And why?" Heron asked slowly, setting down her tablet. "Does the owner of this airline know the name of one flight attendant on one termination list out of thousands of employees? Does it matter?" "It matters enormously, sir. If you want me to actually help you instead of just standing here worrying about you." Her voice softened slightly. "Jun Seo, talk to me." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair, and for a moment looked less like the man 12 business magazines had called Korea's most disciplined CEO, and more like someone genuinely unsure of his own footing. "I flew economy 3 nights ago," he said, "under a different name. I wanted to see something for myself." "You flew economy," Heron repeated flatly, "under an alias, to observe a flight attendant. It sounds worse when you say it like that." "There is no other way to say it that makes it sound better, sir." Jun Seo let out a short, humorless laugh. "She's exceptional, Heron. Not exceptional like a performance review says exceptional, actually exceptional. Kind in a way that costs her something and she does it anyway. And Park is about to fire her because she used sick leave to care for her mother, who's going through chemotherapy. And because his metrics can't tell the difference between someone who's struggling and someone who's failing." Heron studied him for a long moment, something in her expression shifting from professional concern to something more careful. "I'll pull her off the list," she said slowly. "That part is simple. I can restructure the metrics reporting so it reflects context instead of raw numbers. Frankly, it should have worked that way from the start. But Jun Seo," she paused, "that's not actually what you're asking me for help with, is it?" He didn't answer. "You want to see her again," Heron said. It wasn't a question. "I want to make sure she's not being crushed by a system I apparently haven't been paying close enough attention to," Jun Seo said carefully. "That's a very corporate way of saying what I think you actually mean." Jun Seo looked at her, and for the first time in the conversation, something almost vulnerable crossed his face. "I don't know what I mean yet," he admitted. "I know that for 3 hours on a plane, a stranger made me feel like the world was smaller and warmer than I usually let myself believe it is. I haven't stopped thinking about it since." Heron was quiet for a long moment. Then, carefully, "You do understand the position you're in. You're not just a passenger who liked a flight attendant, sir. You're the owner of the company that employs her, deciding her employment, fate from behind a curtain she doesn't know exists. If this goes wrong, if she ever feels manipulated, or used, or like her job security was contingent on your personal interest in her, the fallout wouldn't just hurt you. It could genuinely hurt her." The words landed hard, exactly as she'd intended them to. "I know," Jun Seo said quietly. "That's exactly why I need to do this carefully. Legitimately, not as some rich man playing games from a distance." "Then what's the plan?" Jun Seo thought for a long moment, turning it over. "The airline is launching the new premium cabin redesign next quarter," he said slowly, an idea taking shape in real time. "We need cabin crew feedback for the consultation phase, people who actually work the floor, not just executives making assumptions in a boardroom. It's a legitimate committee. Real work, real compensation, real professional visibility for whoever's selected. And you want her on that committee." "I want her considered for that committee," Jun Seo corrected. "Fairly, based on her actual performance record, which, from what I've already seen, should easily qualify her without anyone needing to tip the scale." Heron studied him for a long moment, weighing something. "That," she said finally, "is actually a reasonable, defensible plan. I can make that work without it looking like anything other than exactly what it is: smart use of frontline expertise." She paused. "But Jun Seo, once she's in that room, working closely with executives, working closely with you, there's no controlling what happens next. You understand that." "I know. And if Park finds out his termination decision was quietly overridden, right around the same time this employee gets pulled onto a high-visibility committee, he's going to ask questions. He's not a stupid man." Jun Seo's jaw tightened slightly. Then we make sure the metrics change looks like a policy update that affects the whole department, not just her. Nothing that points back to one name. Heron nodded slowly, already mentally building the framework. I'll have both pieces moving by end of week. The metrics change and the committee shortlist. She hesitated at the door, turning back. For what it's worth, sir, in 11 years, I've never seen you move this fast, this carefully. Over one person you've spoken to exactly twice. I know how it looks. I didn't say it looked bad, Heron said, a small, knowing smile crossing her face for the first time. I said I'd never seen it. She left. Jun Seo sat alone in his office, the city stretched out below him in its usual indifferent glitter, and allowed himself, for just a moment, to imagine what it might feel like to sit across a conference table from Abina Owusu, not as a stranger in economy. Not as an owner watching footage from a distance, but as two people simply doing the same work in the same room. He had no way of knowing, yet, that 4 floors below him, Park Yongo was already growing suspicious about a metrics policy change that had appeared out of nowhere. With no clear origin, no clear author, and that suspicious men in positions like his had a long, ugly history of finding out exactly what they weren't supposed to know. 2 weeks later, Abina stood in the doorway of conference room 12B, staring at the shortlist printout in her hand like it might rearrange itself into someone else's name if she looked hard enough. Cabin Crew Consultation Committee Premium Redesign Initiative. Selected. A. Owusu, there has to be a mistake, she said out loud, to no one, in the empty hallway. There isn't, said a voice behind her. She turned to find her supervisor, Mrs. Choi, smiling with what looked like genuine pride. You were selected on merit, Abina, highest passenger satisfaction scores in your division, 3 years running. They want people who actually understand the floor, not just people who look good in a boardroom. But Park said. Abina stopped herself, unsure how much to say out loud. Mrs. Choi's smile faltered slightly. Whatever Park said, forget it. The committee decision came from much higher up. This is a real opportunity, Abina. Take it. Abina walked into the conference room 15 minutes later, still slightly stunned, and found 6 other cabin crew members already seated around a long glass table, along with 2 executives she didn't recognize, and at the head of the table, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit that made him look nothing like the tired man in the gray hoodie from 3 weeks ago, Han Jun Seo. She froze in the doorway. Pillow guy. Their eyes met across the room, and for one unguarded second, something passed between them: recognition, surprise, the particular vertigo of realizing a stranger from your memory has an entirely different, much larger life than you assumed. Jun Seo recovered first, his expression settling into practiced neutrality. Ms. Owusu, thank you for joining us. Please, take a seat. Abina sat, her mind racing, replaying every word she'd said to him on that flight. Some rules are stupid. You looked like you were about to file a formal complaint against Gravity. She had joked with the owner of the airline. She had told him about her mother without knowing who he was. The meeting proceeded with excruciating professionalism. Jun Seo asked pointed, intelligent questions about seat comfort, meal service timing, crew workload during long-haul flights, nothing personal, nothing that acknowledged their previous encounter at all. Abina answered carefully, professionally, watching him the way she'd watch a stranger, except he wasn't a stranger, and the not acknowledging felt stranger than acknowledgement would have. Near the end of the meeting, as the other committee members gathered their things, Jun Seo said, almost casually, Miss Owusu, could you stay a moment? I have a follow-up question about crew fatigue protocols. The room emptied. The door clicked shut. Silence stretched between them. You're him, Abina said finally, once they were alone. The pillow. Seat 34C. Her voice was careful, controlled, but underneath it Jun Seo could hear something sharper building. You're the owner of this entire airline, and you sat in economy, and you let me talk to you for 3 hours like you were just some tired businessman. I was going to tell you, Jun Seo said. When? Before or after you apparently had me placed on this committee? Her jaw tightened. Is that what this is? Some kind of I don't even know what to call it. A reward for being nice to you without knowing who you were? No. Jun Seo said quickly, firmly, you're on this committee because your passenger satisfaction scores are the highest in your division. That part is entirely real, entirely yours. Then why do I feel like I'm standing inside something you built, Abina said, instead of something I earned? The question landed harder than he expected, and for a moment Jun Seo said nothing, searching for an answer honest enough to survive her scrutiny. Because both things are true, he admitted finally. You earned your place on this committee, and I also made sure your name was removed from a termination list 3 weeks ago, before you ever knew it existed. Abina went very still. What termination list? Jun Seo held her gaze, understanding there was no version of this conversation where he could soften what came next. Park Yong-oh was preparing to cut 11 positions based on customer complaint ratios. Your sick leave for your mother's treatment was going to count against you, despite your record being otherwise spotless. I heard about it, overheard it actually on the flight, though I wasn't trying to, and I had the metrics policy changed so situations like yours would be evaluated with context instead of raw numbers. You overheard it, Abina repeated slowly, horror dawning in her voice. You heard me talking about my mother's chemo. In the galley. At 3 a.m, thinking I was talking to a coworker in private. Yes, and you didn't say anything. You just sat there. Listening, then went back to your empire and rearranged my entire employment status without ever telling me any of it was happening. I was trying to protect you without turning it into a spectacle. Jun Seo said, aware even as he said it how thin that justification sounded out loud. If people knew the owner had personally intervened on behalf of one flight attendant, it would have made your position harder, not easier. People would assume things. Say things. People are going to assume things anyway, Abina said, her voice rising now, sharp with a hurt she was visibly trying to keep contained. Look at what's happening right now, in this room, with the door closed, after you specifically asked me to stay behind. Do you understand how this looks? Do you understand what it does to me, professionally, if anyone finds out the owner has been quietly managing my career from the shadows because he liked how I handled a crying child on a red-eye flight? Jun Seo felt the accuracy of her words like a blow. She wasn't wrong. Every careful, well-intentioned decision he'd made over the past 3 weeks had been built entirely from his own perspective, his own guilt, his own fascination, his own desire to help, without once considering how it would land on the other side, on a woman who had no idea any of it was happening until it was already done. You're right, he said quietly. I didn't think about how this would look from where you're standing. I only thought about fixing something I felt responsible for once I knew about it. You're not responsible for me, Abena said, though some of the sharpness had drained out of her voice, replaced by something more tired. I've survived plenty without a stranger from economy class rearranging my life behind my back. I know that now, Jun Seo said. I'm sorry. Abina studied him for a long moment, her arms crossed, some internal calculation working behind her eyes. I want off this committee, she said finally. Jun Seo's stomach dropped. Abina Miss Owusu, she corrected sharply. And I mean it. I earned my scores. I'll keep my job on my own merits. Without you managing the scenery around me like some kind of guardian angel with a corporate budget. If I'm going to be on that committee, it needs to be because Mrs. Choi genuinely believes I belong there, not because the man at the head of the table already decided I do. She turned and walked toward the door, then paused, her hand on the handle, not quite looking back at him. For what it's worth, she said quietly, the man in seat 34C was kind. Uncomplicated, easy to talk to. A pause. I'm not sure yet what to do with the man sitting at the head of this table. She left. Jun Seo stood alone in the empty conference room, the glass table reflecting the gray afternoon light, and understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that in trying to protect her, he had done exactly the thing she'd feared most from powerful men, decided things about her life without asking her first. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Heron. Heron, Park just requested a meeting with legal. He wants to know who authorized the metrics policy change and why it happened 3 days after a specific employee's file was flagged for review. He's not letting this go, sir. Jun's CEO stared at the message, the walls of his careful, deniable plan already beginning to crack from a direction he hadn't fully anticipated. Jun's CEO requested the meeting with Park himself, rather than waiting to be summoned, a small act of control in a situation that was rapidly slipping away from him. Park Young-ho sat across the desk in Jun's CEO's office the following morning, a thin folder in his hands, his expression carefully neutral in the way of a man who had spent 20 years in corporate politics, learning exactly how much to reveal. "I appreciate you making time, sir," Park said. "I wanted to raise a concern directly with you, rather than routing it through several layers of management." "Go ahead." The metrics policy for cabin crew terminations changed 3 weeks ago. Sick leave taken for documented family medical emergencies is now weighted differently in the complaint ratio calculation. Park opened the folder, sliding a printed memo across the desk. "The change came from your office directly, sir, bypassing the normal review process. I'm not questioning whether it's a good policy, frankly. It probably should have worked this way from the start. I'm asking why it happened so suddenly, and so specifically, 3 days after I flagged Abina Owusu's file for the termination list." Jun's CEO kept his expression still, though internally he registered how precisely Park had connected the timeline. This was not a man he could easily manage with vague corporate language. The policy change reflects a broader initiative to modernize how we evaluate crew performance, Jun's CEO said carefully. Raw complaint ratios without context have always been a flawed metric. This was overdue. "I don't disagree," Park said. "But overdue changes rarely happen in 3 days, sir. Unless someone specific prompts them." He met Jun's CEO's eyes directly. "With respect, is there a personal reason you're protecting this particular employee?" The question hung in the air, blunt and unavoidable. Jun's CEO had negotiated hostile acquisitions, faced down aggressive shareholders, sat across tables from men who wanted to destroy his company for sport. None of it prepared him for the particular discomfort of a mid-level manager asking, plainly, whether he had a personal interest in one flight attendant. "I take employee welfare seriously across the entire company," Jun's CEO said, which was true. And also, they both understood, not actually an answer. Park studied him for a long moment, and something shifted in his posture, not quite satisfaction, but the settling of a suspicion into something closer to certainty. "Understood, sir," he said, closing the folder. "I'll make sure the policy change is implemented company-wide, effective immediately. No exceptions for any specific individual." A pause, deliberate, that should resolve any appearance of impropriety. He left. Jun's CEO sat alone. Understanding exactly what had just happened, Park hadn't been convinced. He'd been given a professional, deniable exit, and he'd taken it while making it clear, in the careful language of corporate self-preservation, that he knew more than he was saying, and would remember it. 3 days later, the story broke. Not from Park directly, Jun's CEO would spend weeks afterward trying to trace exactly how it happened, whether through a careless comment overheard by the wrong person, a screenshot of an internal memo, or something else entirely. But by Thursday morning, a business gossip account with 500,000 followers had posted a story with the headline, "Airline CEO personally intervenes to save one employee's job, sources say it's not about performance." The article was carefully vague, citing internal sources, implying favoritism without stating anything concrete enough to be actionable. But it included one detail that made Jun's CEO's stomach drop the moment he read it. Sources say the employee in question, a flight attendant of Ghanaian descent, was personally selected for a high-visibility executive committee shortly after the policy change, raising questions about whether her placement reflects merit or personal favor from the company's owner. His phone rang within the hour. Abina's name on the screen, something he hadn't expected so soon, not after how their last conversation had ended. "Have you seen it?" she said, without preamble, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "I've seen it. Do you understand what this does to me? Everyone in that building is going to read this and assume exactly what the article implies, that I'm sleeping with the owner, or angling to. That my scores don't matter, that my 3 years of actual work don't matter, that the only reason I'm on that committee is because a rich man decided he liked me on a plane. Her voice cracked slightly, the anger giving way, just for a moment, to something rawer. I have spent my entire career being told I have to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. And now, because of you, everyone gets to believe the laziest, ugliest version of why I got anywhere at all. Abina, I need you to fix this, she said, cutting him off. Publicly, clearly, not with some vague corporate statement that makes it worse. I need people to understand the truth, or I need to walk away from that committee entirely and go back to being invisible, which frankly sounds safer right now than whatever this is. Jun Seo closed his eyes, the full weight of the situation settling over him. Every choice he'd made, flying economy, changing the metrics policy, placing her on the committee, had been made with what he'd told himself were good intentions. And every single one of those choices had, without his fully realizing it, been made about her without ever being made with her. I'll fix it, he said quietly. I promise you that. But Abina, I need you to understand something first, and I need you to actually hear it, not just brace for another excuse. I'm listening. I'm not going to fix this by hiding further, Jun Seo said slowly, the decision forming even as he spoke it aloud. I'm going to fix it by telling the truth. All of it. Publicly, that I overheard something I shouldn't have, that I acted on it because I couldn't unhear it, and that your placement on that committee was based entirely on merit you'd already earned before I ever set foot on that flight. That will make it worse, Abina said quickly. If you publicly connect yourself to me at all, it confirms exactly what people already suspect. Maybe, Jun Seo admitted. Or maybe it removes the mystery that's letting people fill in the worst version of the story. I don't know which it will be. But I know staying silent hasn't protected you so far. It's only put you in exactly the position you're in right now. There was a long silence on the line. I don't know if I trust your judgment on this, Abina said finally, quiet and honest. You've made a lot of decisions about my life without asking me first, Han Jun Seo. Forgive me for not immediately believing this one will be different. Then let me ask you, he said. For the first time, properly, what do you want me to do? The silence stretched longer this time, and when she finally spoke, her voice had changed, still guarded. But something in it had shifted toward consideration instead of pure anger. I want to think, she said. And I want you to actually wait for my answer this time instead of deciding for both of us. I will. She hung up without saying goodbye. Jun Seo set the phone down slowly on his desk, staring out at the city below, and understood that whatever happened next with the article, with the committee, with Park's quiet, calculating suspicion, the thing that mattered most now was something he'd never once had to practice in his entire life of controlling outcomes, waiting for someone else's decision, and actually respecting whatever it turned out to be. 2 days passed before Abina called back. Jun Seo spent them exactly as he'd promised, waiting, not pushing, not sending a single message. Though every hour of silence felt like its own particular kind of discipline he'd never had to practice before. When his phone finally rang, he answered on the first ring. I've thought about it, Abina said, without preamble. And I want to meet. In person. Not your office. Somewhere neither of us has any power over the other. They met that evening at a small, unremarkable cafe near her apartment in Itaewon. The kind of place with mismatched chairs and a menu written on a chalkboard, entirely unlike anywhere Jun Seo normally conducted business. He arrived first, chose a corner table, and waited, feeling more exposed in his plain jacket and quiet corner seat than he ever had in any boardroom. Abina arrived 11 minutes later, off-duty, in jeans and a soft yellow sweater, her natural hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in the tight regulation bun he'd only ever seen her wear. She looked younger somehow, and more tired, and entirely unguarded in a way that made something in Jun Seo's chest tighten. Thank you for coming, he said. I almost didn't, she said, sitting down across from him. I've spent 2 days trying to figure out if I'm angry at you, or angry at a system that made it so easy for you to rearrange my life without asking. or angry at myself for liking the man in seat 34C so much that finding out who he really was felt like losing something. You didn't lose him, Junseo said quietly. He's still me. I didn't perform kindness on that flight, Abina. That wasn't a character I was playing to observe you. That was just a version of myself I don't usually get to be. Because everywhere else, I'm always the most powerful person in the room, and people adjust themselves around that whether they mean to or not. Abina studied him for a long moment. That's the part I keep getting stuck on, she said. Everyone adjusts themselves around you, including me, now, whether I want to or not. Even sitting here in this ordinary cafe, some part of me is aware that you could end my career with a phone call, and that awareness changes everything, even when you're not trying to use it. I know, Junseo said. I can't undo that. I can only tell you that I don't want to use it. Not now, not ever, regardless of what happens between us. She was quiet for a while, turning her coffee cup slowly on the table. My mother's chemo is almost finished, she said finally, changing direction slightly. 4 more sessions. The doctors are cautiously optimistic. A small, tired smile. I haven't had anyone to tell that to who actually understood the weight of it. Sorry, wrong story, she said suddenly, catching herself with an unexpected, surprised laugh. I don't know why I said that name. I don't know anyone named Bio. Junseo blinked, momentarily thrown by the strange, oddly specific slip, then let it go, chalking it up to exhaustion. I'm glad she's doing better, he said instead. Genuinely, thank you. Abina looked at him directly. I read the statement your PR team drafted, the one about the committee selection process, clarifying my scores and my record. What did you think? It was accurate, she said. Thorough. It didn't hide anything, including the fact that you personally changed the metrics policy after learning about my situation. It was honest in exactly the way you promised it would be. But it also made you look like exactly what you are, she said. A powerful man who noticed a struggling employee and quietly fixed things behind the scenes. And I keep asking myself whether that story is actually about my competence, or whether it's just a better-dressed version of the same story people already assumed that I got somewhere because a rich man decided to help me. Junseo absorbed that carefully. What would make it different? Time, Abina said simply. If I stay on that committee and it becomes obvious, over months, that I'm there because I'm good at my job genuinely, consistently, without you hovering nearby explaining it then, maybe the story changes on its own. Not because of a press release, because of actual, visible work. That's fair, Junseo said. I can stay away from the committee entirely if that helps. Let Mrs. Choi run it without my involvement. I'd want that, Abina said. And I'd want you to actually mean it, not just say it and then quietly check in through Heron every week. Junseo almost smiled. You know about Heron. I did some research of my own, Abina admitted, a hint of dry humor breaking through for the first time. Turns out, it's not hard to find information about a CEO once you know his real name. They sat in a silence that felt, for the first time since the conference room, almost comfortable. Can I ask you something? Junseo said finally. On the flight. Before any of this. Why did you tell me that thing? About your mother. About small kindness being the only kindness most people get to give. You didn't know me. You had no reason to say something that honest to a stranger. Abina considered the question seriously. I think, she said slowly, some people just feel safe to talk to, even before you know anything real about them. There was something about you that night, tired, guarded, but paying attention in a way most passengers don't. I didn't know you owned the airline. I just knew you were listening like it mattered. She paused. I still think that part was real. I just don't know yet how to hold it next to everything else I've learned about you since. I don't need you to know yet, Junseo said. I just needed you to know I'm not going anywhere while you figure it out. Abina's phone buzzed on the table between them. She glanced down, and her expression shifted instantly surprise, then something more troubled. It's Mrs. Choi, she said, frowning. She says Park requested an emergency meeting with the board this morning. About cabin crew policy irregularities. She looked up at Junseo, alarm creeping into her voice. Jun Seo, what does that mean? Jun Seo's jaw tightened as his own phone began buzzing in his pocket, 3 messages arriving in rapid succession. All from Heron. Heron, Park went over your head. Straight to the board. He's alleging misuse of executive authority and requesting a formal review. Heron, he has documentation. Jun Seo, timeline correlations, the policy memo, the committee shortlist. It's organized. This isn't a spontaneous complaint. Heron, the board meeting is tomorrow morning. You need to be there. And you need a strategy before you walk in, because right now, this looks exactly as bad as it actually is. Jun Seo looked up from his phone to find Abina watching him, already reading the tension in his face before he said a single word. It's bad, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. It's bad, Jun Seo confirmed. Park's taken it to the board. Formal review of executive authority. Tomorrow morning. Abina sat back slowly in her chair, the weight of it settling over both of them. If the board sides with him, she said, what happens to you? Jun Seo met her eyes, and for the first time since this had all begun, he let her see exactly how uncertain the answer actually was. I don't know, he said honestly, but I know what happens to you if I handle tomorrow wrong, and that's the part I actually can't afford to get wrong. The boardroom on the 40th floor was colder than Jun Seo remembered it being, though he suspected the temperature hadn't changed at all. 9 board members sat around the long table, along with Park Yong-ho. Seated near the end with a folder in front of him, thick enough to make Jun Seo's stomach tighten the moment he saw it. Heron sat beside Jun Seo's usual chair, her expression carefully composed, though he could see the tension in how tightly she gripped her own folder. Thank you all for accommodating this on short notice, Chairman Yang said, calling the meeting to order. He was the oldest board member, a founding investor from the company's earliest days, a man whose quiet authority came from decades of being right more often than he was wrong. Mr. Park has raised a formal concern regarding executive conduct. Mr. Park, please proceed. Park stood, opened his folder, and laid out the timeline with the precision of a man who had built his entire career on exactly this kind of methodical presentation. The metrics policy change, the 3-day gap between flagging Abina's file and the policy shift. The committee shortlist appearing days later. The tabloid article, which he'd printed and circulated to every board member without comment, letting its implications speak for themselves. I want to be clear, Park said, closing his folder. I'm not alleging anything improper occurred between Mr. Han and this employee. I'm alleging that executive authority was used to override standard processes based on personal interest, without transparency, without board notification, in a way that exposes this company to significant reputational and legal risk. If it can happen once, quietly, for one employee, it establishes a precedent this board should be deeply concerned about. Silence settled over the room. Several board members exchanged glances. Jun Seo felt Heron's hand briefly touch his arm beneath the table, a small, steadying gesture. Mr. Han, Chairman Yang said. Would you like to respond? Jun Seo stood slowly. He had spent the entire night rehearsing versions of this response, careful, lawyered, minimally exposing. Sometime around 3 a.m, staring at his ceiling, he had discarded every single one of them. Everything in Mr. Park's timeline is accurate, Jun Seo said. The room went very still. I did personally intervene in a termination decision. I did direct a metrics policy change specifically because of what I learned about one employee's situation. I did ensure her selection was considered for the consultation committee, though her scores would have qualified her regardless of any involvement from me. Park's expression flickered with something like vindication. I want to explain why, Jun Seo continued, not to excuse the process failure, which I acknowledge was real, but because I think this board deserves the actual truth, not a sanitized version of it. He paused. 3 weeks ago, I flew economy, under an assumed name, to observe frontline service without the distortion my presence usually creates. During that flight, I witnessed an employee show extraordinary care to passengers, the kind of care that doesn't show up in any metric we currently measure. Later that same night, I overheard, entirely by accident, that this employee was facing termination based on a sick leave policy that didn't account for the fact that she was caring for her mother through cancer treatment, while maintaining the highest passenger satisfaction scores in her division for 3 consecutive years. He looked around the table slowly, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. "I made a mistake," he said. "Not in caring about what I learned, not in wanting to fix an obviously broken metric. My mistake was in handling it quietly, personally, and without transparency because I was more concerned with avoiding spectacle than with doing this correctly, through proper channels in a way that would have protected both the company and the employee in question." He paused. "That employee has since told me, directly and clearly, that my handling of this situation caused her real professional harm, regardless of my intentions. She was right to tell me that. I'm not interested in defending a version of events that protects my judgment at the expense of hers." Chairman Yang studied him for a long moment. "What would you propose, Mr. Han, as a remedy?" "First," Jun Seo said, "the metrics policy change stands, company-wide. With no exceptions, it was overdue regardless of how it came about. And reversing it now would punish every employee who benefits from it, simply to resolve my personal failure of process. Second, I'll submit to whatever review this board deems appropriate regarding the process failure, full transparency, full documentation, no restrictions." He paused. "Third, and this is not something I say lightly, I'll recuse myself from any further involvement in that consultation committee, and from any decision, however small, that touches Miss Owusu's employment, for as long as she remains with this company. That decision-making authority moves entirely to Mrs. Choi and standard HR process. Permanently." A murmur moved through the room. Park's expression shifted from vindication towards something more uncertain. "That's a significant personal concession, Mr. Han," Chairman Yang said slowly. "It's the correct one," Jun Seo said simply. "I built this company on the principle that good judgment matters more than rigid process. I still believe that. But I learned this week that judgment without transparency isn't actually judgment, it's just quiet power, exercised without accountability. I'd rather lose some authority than keep exercising it in a way that puts someone else at risk for my comfort." The room was silent for a long moment. Then, Chairman Yang, unexpectedly, allowed himself something close to a small smile. "In 30 years on this board," he said, "I have heard a great many executives explain why their judgment shouldn't be questioned. I have heard exactly one explain, unprompted, why it should be." He looked around the table. "I move that we accept Mr. Han's proposed remedy in full, with a formal review process to follow, and no further disciplinary action beyond what he's already offered." The vote passed, 7-2. Park sat very still throughout, his expression unreadable, though as the meeting adjourned, he approached Jun Seo briefly at the door. "For what it's worth, sir," Park said quietly, "I wasn't trying to destroy you. I was trying to make sure the rules apply the same way to everyone, including the man who owns the company." "You were right to push," Jun Seo said, and meant it. "I needed to be pushed." 3 months later, Jun Seo stood at the back of a crowded auditorium, watching from a distance as the Premium Cabin Redesign Committee presented its final recommendations to a room of executives, journalists, and airline staff. Abina stood at the podium, poised and confident, walking the room through changes she'd helped design: better fold-down space for crew during long-haul turbulence, revised meal timing based on actual crew feedback rather than executive assumption, a small compartment specifically designed to hold extra comfort items for passengers in distress. She hadn't needed his help. She'd earned every bit of the room's attention entirely on her own, exactly as she'd insisted she would. Afterward, as the crowd thinned, she found him near the back, still keeping the careful distance he'd promised the board he would keep. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I wanted to see it," he said. "As a passenger, not as your boss. I bought a ticket like everyone else." Abina raised an eyebrow, the corner of her mouth lifting. "Did you fly economy again?" First class, actually, Junseo said. I figured I'd earned that much back. She laughed a real laugh, unguarded, the same one he remembered from a plane somewhere over the Pacific, before either of them knew how complicated this would become. My mother's finished treatment, she said, softer now. Clean scan, last week. Abina. That's wonderful. She wants to meet the man who apparently caused an international corporate scandal by paying too much attention to her daughter on a red-eye flight, Abina said, though her eyes were warm, teasing rather than sharp. I told her that's not exactly how I'd summarize it, but she insists on hearing the whole story herself. Junseo felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for 3 months. I'd like that, he said, if you'll have me. Abina studied him for a long moment, the same careful, evaluating look she'd given him back in that conference room, except softer now, worn smooth by months of him actually keeping his word. I think, she said slowly, I'm finally ready to find out who the man at the head of the table actually is. Properly this time. No committees, no metrics, no board meetings deciding things about us before we've decided them ourselves. Just 2 people, Junseo said, figuring it out. Just that, Abina agreed. They walked out of the auditorium together, into an ordinary afternoon, no cameras, no headlines. No spectacle at all, exactly the kind of quiet, unremarkable beginning that neither economy class nor boardroom could have predicted for either of them. If this story had you holding your breath through that boardroom scene, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to tell me where you're watching from tonight. I love seeing this community stretch across the whole world. Subscribe for more stories about powerful men who learn that real strength means giving power back, not just using it well. See you in the next one.